3-minute limit.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, it's worth noting that the Wild Animals in Circuses Act, which affected 19 animals, this House had more time to debate that than we've had this particular bill. The Institute for Government said that the timetable appears to have been deliberately designed to frustrate scrutiny. Clearly it was. And when the Leader of the House announced the business motion, I think the grin that kept on spreading across his face confirmed that. It's right that I think members have focused on the issue of Northern Ireland during this debate. And I just want to focus briefly on this issue of tariffs and the tariffs that are going to be applied to goods or intermediary goods at risk of being sold into the Republic of Ireland. And I do want some clarity on this in terms of what goods are we actually talking about and how on earth are they going to be tracked, because there is no technological solution which provides the granularity that's going to be required to accurately track goods movements, because obviously multiple goods may even be shared on the same pallet, let alone in the same lorry. And consequently, it's hard to see how, in fact, all companies are not going to have tariffs levied on them up front and then going to be required to seek a rebate. So clearly the impact of business in Northern Ireland is going to be significant, and we've heard about the export forms that they're going to have to complete to send goods to Great Britain. And of course all of this coming to them courtesy of a party which apparently was in favour of reducing red tape to businesses. Now the cost of the legislation, the impact assessment does in fact only look at the legislation, it doesn't actually look at the impact of Brexit, talks about costs running at £167 million per year, and interestingly says that the benefit to business is precisely zero. Now the Minister or the Chancellor has said that self-evidently it's in our economic interests and to go for Brexit. Now we have focused extensively on the issue of no deal, but it is worth focusing a little bit on this deal and whether in fact there is any economic interest in the United Kingdom in it. And we know from the various analyses looking at comparable deals that we are going to be at least £2,000 worse off, that the hit on wages is 6.4%, the hit on GDP is 6.7%, and the non-tariff barriers are going to be catastrophic for sectors like the automotive and chemical sectors. So how do we get out of the mess that we're in? As other members have said, there is only one way forward, and that is through a confirmatory vote, and certainly the Liberal Democrats, we are adding our name to the Kyle Wilson amendment, and I hope that that is an amendment which will secure the support of the House so that we can proceed with a sensible way out of the catastrophe that we are facing.
3-minute limit. Bob Seeley.
Mr. Speaker, I'm voting for this deal because the country voted to leave. My folks on the Isle of Wight voted to leave. It is a pleasure to represent them and to speak on their behalf. One of the things that confuses me with the party opposite, and indeed the Honourable lady from Brighton Pavilion, was the extent to which the European Union is used as a device for improving standards or for the development of social Europe. The common agricultural policy has been bad for the environment. The common fisheries policy kills millions of fish needlessly every year. And yet the Liberals, the Greens, the Labour Party worship this institution, the European Union, as if it is good for animals, as if it is good for the environment. They want live animal exports. We want to ban them. We are not allowed to do so under European Union legislation. And regarding human beings, for the EU minimum for annual leave, 20 days. In this country, it's 28. Maternity leave, 14 weeks minimum paid in the European Union, 35 weeks minimum here. The posting of workers to other countries to undercut them, illegal here, allowed in the rest of the European Union. 18 weeks of parental leave per person, per child in the UK, up in the European Union, up to the age of 8. If they want higher standards, Mr. Speaker, they should be leaving the European Union, not attempting to join it. The second point I'm going to make, above the din of the party opposite trying to ignore what I'm saying, is that out of 104 Labour MPs, out of all the Labour MPs, 104 are in majority leave seats. 52 have leave majorities of 60%. 8 have Leave majorities of more than 70%, and we are getting into North Korean percentage territory here. And yet, if I were them, I would be listening to my constituents and my constituency more than I would its party leadership, because those constituents and those constituencies are likely to be there longer than that party's leadership is. That may be there for a period of weeks and months, those constituencies there for many, many years to come. It's easy for me to support this because I voted for Brexit, as did my constituency. But I respect very much those people here on this side and on the other side who are voting for Brexit or allowing it to happen despite not having supported it. And I think for me, the most important thing is that we finally get on and deliver something which is recognisably Brexit, so that we can move on, and as the Right Honourable Gentleman for Aylesbury says, we can talk about all the important other things that we need to discuss in both domestic policy and international policy. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, I'm supporting this bill. Thank you.
Mrs. Marion Fellow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Scots Language Centre defines thrawn as twisted, crooked, distorted, which, in my opinion, applies to the Prime Minister's explanation of his withdrawal agreement bill this afternoon. And across the Chamber, members have asked the Prime Minister questions on what he said, and none of them seem reassured in any way. Thrawn, referring to a person, means stubbornness and absolute conviction, which I have in equal measure, for I will vote against this bill and the procedure motion, as I am stubborn in wanting the best for the people of Motherwell and Wishaw, and have the firm conviction that Scotland will be damaged if this bill is passed, that its needs and economic interests are ignored by this bill's contents. I stubbornly refuse to vote to make my constituents poorer, limit free movement of people, lower environmental standards and reduce workers' rights. The Prime Minister referred to the law of the land, perhaps in his speech. Perhaps he should remember that the Court of Session has a watching brief on his actions in relation to this Act of Parliament, requiring him to apply for an extension from the EU. The Prime Minister also referred to a great tide of investment which will come after we leave the EU. Will he tell that to those who have already lost their jobs in the financial services and manufacturing and other sectors across the UK? Mr. Speaker, the Deputy Director of the Institute of Government says anyone who claims meaningful legislative scrutiny is possible on this timetable is at best misguided. And I smell a rat, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister is trying to rush this bill through so quickly. Could it be it won't actually stand up to intense scrutiny? I agree with the Right Honourable Member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber that this bill completely ignores the wishes of the majority of the people of Scotland. NI differentiation does not help Scotland. Ignoring the Scottish Parliament legislation that they've done doesn't help the people of Scotland. Devolution is being totally disrespected. Independence is now the only answer.
Thank you. Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to speak in this debate. And after almost three and a half long years, it is actually quite refreshing to get to the point where we can actually debate the legislation that is going to take us out of the EU. It's been a wandering and at times tortuous path, but at last we're here. And I'm sure that if this week we can see this bill progress and pass its third reading, there are many, many people across the country who will simply breathe a huge sigh of relief that we're getting on with it. Because the last thing we need in this country is delay, is more dither, is procrastination and prolonging the uncertainty. Actually, during passage of this debate today, I received a text message from the Chief Executive of one of our most prominent businesses in Cornwall, one of our largest companies that employs hundreds of people both in Cornwall and across the country. And he was concerned that the voice of business was not being heard in this debate enough, because I think there is a very clear message from the business community, and that is get on with it, back the deal, pass this bill, because they are concerned of the economic impact that further delay and dither will have on consumer confidence and on business investment. And I'm convinced that if we can get this bill passed, we will see a release of confidence and investment in our country and into our economy. In the time I've got left, I just want to address a couple of very specific points. Many members have talked about supporting this deal only if it is attached to another referendum. Well, what I would say to those honourable members is, where is the mandate for that? In 2015, when I was first elected, I stood on a manifesto commitment that if the Conservative Party won that election, we would bring a referendum in out of the EU. That was the mandate for that referendum. In 2017, the vast majority of members of this House were elected on a manifesto commitment to deliver on that referendum result. And I would say respectfully, I'm not going to take interventions to the members opposite, that if you wanted a second referendum, you should have put it in a manifesto and voted for a general election last month, and you could have had the election last month, and if you would have won the election, you could have had your second referendum. There is no mandate for a second referendum. I also want to put on record, I do welcome in this bill, the measures to protect the rights of EU citizens resident here, and I believe the government is doing the right thing. And what I would say is we need to send a very clear message from this House that all EU citizens resident in the UK are welcome to stay. And I would respectfully say to some of the members opposite that the reason some of them don't feel welcome is because what they hear from some members of this House is that the government don't want them, and that is blatantly untrue. We have an opportunity tonight to come together across this House to vote for this deal and to back the result of the referendum, and that's what we should do.
Michael Tomlinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to make two very brief points. Firstly, one on workers' rights. You do not have to be a member of the European Union in order to protect workers' rights. The rights in this country already go above and beyond those in the European Union. Let me give you 4 examples. The living wage, sick pay, maternity, annual leave, all protected by legislation passed in this sovereign parliament, and we will continue to do so certainly on this side of the House. The second point, Mr. Speaker, is in relation to the programme motion. It seems to me that many of those who are complaining today about the programme motion were the same people who rushed through the Benn Act. Where were the voices complaining at that time about the lack of time for parliamentary scrutiny when that act was pushed through? It seems to me, Mr. Speaker, it is not an in-principle objection to scrutiny, it is one of convenience and one of political dogma. If you like the bill, it seems to me that you're happy for it to be rushed through. If you don't, you are not, and that seems to be the case even more strongly this evening.
I'm extremely grateful. Robert Core.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, for longer than I have been alive, this country has struggled with its position within Europe. We've been tied by geography and culture with that continent, but by history and language to the wider English-speaking world. The country's attitude can perhaps be summed up as like a passenger in a car that has constantly been asking to slow down or to change direction. And this increased integration that has always been envisaged in the European project and which was made inevitable by the euro has meant that at some stage it's been inevitable the country had to deal with the consequences of joining a political union whilst trying to persuade itself that it was just a trade bloc. And so it was that 40 years of drift were succeeded by 3 years of division. But Mr. Speaker, we have a chance to end all that tonight, because we are approaching the moment of decision in a country that is crying out for direction. It will not be possible for much longer to continue to say that you respect the result of the referendum, remembering 80% of us in this House were elected upon manifesto commitments to carry out the referendum result, but that you want a deal, because we have a deal here. Further delay will be interpreted by the public either as blocking Brexit or as an inability to put party politics aside in the national interest. I would suggest that the country will never be brought back together by telling the majority of the people in the country that their decision was wrong. The only way the country can be unified is by backing a compromise deal that brings democratic control of this country's laws to this country, whilst ensuring the continuation of the cooperation, of the trade and of the culture that's valued by all of us, but those who voted to remain fear losing. Mr. Speaker, this is such a deal, but it is a compromise. There are elements in all of it that many of us may have some reservations about, and I entirely understand that. But it does satisfy most of the requirements of the referendum. It does guarantee an open border in Ireland. It has a smooth handover for business. It sets the path for an independent, free trading future. And I would ask all those with concerns to stand behind the government and engage with a view to influencing the next stage and ensuring we have that free trade agreement. We must be clear, most of the objections we have heard tonight are those that really should be reserved for the future relationship. Only by voting for this bill tonight can the country be moved forward, and that includes the programme motion. Mr. Speaker, the country is crying out for a decision for us to move on. Any delay will just lead to more discord. The time has arrived for us to move on. Mr. Speaker, we must grasp it tonight.
Mr. Richard Graham.
Mr. Speaker, when the Prime Minister said it was 1,000,000 to 1 against no deal, some of us had doubts. And I would agree with the Right Honourable Member for Leeds Central when he wrote that it was utterly irresponsible for this government to be rushing towards no deal if it were true. So now the Prime Minister has produced a deal. Surely all of those here against no deal can come together to support it. But in fact, too many members will never support leaving, despite the pledge they were elected on. They want a second referendum to overturn the original one, and the leader of the Liberal Democrats goes further. She would not accept the wrong result of a second referendum. So contrary to what some people argue, a second referendum will not bring us together. We cannot trust the opposition parties to carry out the results of a referendum that go the wrong way any more than they have so far. Now, some say there is not enough time to debate the bill. My friend, the Right Honourable Member for Penrith and the Borders, says he wishes there were 3 days more to debate it. But as the Institute for Government has said, there are some for whom no amount of debate will be enough. Then there is the Leader of the Opposition, who said that his greatest worry is the serious threat for manufacturing from not being in a customs union. So he should support both the second reading and the programme motion, table an amendment at committee stage, and if that didn't work, put it in their manifesto, campaign on it in an election, form the next government and negotiate that in the free trade agreement. The point, Mr. Speaker, is that the customs union, let alone the NHS, has nothing to do with the EU withdrawal agreement bill. And frankly, the manufacturers I know are a lot more concerned about what the Leader of the Opposition and the Shadow Chancellor will do to them than this deal. So, there are changes on the Northern Ireland Protocol which are very relevant, but because they're internal between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, they can be resolved between us. And that is why it is so important that the Democratic Union Party do support a deal in order to make sure they don't get the worst possible result for Northern Ireland, which would be no deal. So let our constituents be clear. There will never be a perfect deal any more than a perfect job or a perfect marriage. I said 3 years ago that we need a deal that few will love but most of us could live with. And there is enough in the political declaration to reassure those who are open to be reassured on environmental and workers' rights, enough to respect the Good Friday Agreement, and enough to reassure all of those elected to respect the results of the referendum that we are delivering the pledge that what you decide, we will implement. And that, Mr. Speaker, is why all of us should leave the EU in a sensible way and vote for this bill.
Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this bill will have profound economic, social and political consequences for our country for decades. The jobs and livelihoods of our constituents depend upon our deliberations on the bill and on our ability to look carefully at its profound consequences. And I've listened carefully to over 30 contributions from the backbenches and commend particularly contributions from my honourable friends for Leeds Central, Tottenham, Scunthorpe, Stalybridge and Hyde, Sedgefield and Leicester West. Yet this government, Mr. Speaker, having tried unlawfully to shut down Parliament altogether, now tries to shut down the ability of members to properly scrutinise the most important piece of legislation that's been brought to this House for generations. Weariness with the politics of the last 3 years is no good reason to wade through a bill of such huge significance in less than 36 hours. Rather, it's our duty to subject every clause of this monumental bill to close examination and to understand its full impact on people's lives up and down the country. There was and is no good reason for this government not to have extended the time allocated. And the Prime Minister comes in as an opportune moment, because it was at the behest of the Prime Minister that we sat last Saturday when it suited him. And yet this week we are closing down deliberations on Thursday. It's not only unnecessary, it's reckless, one moment, and it is an abomination to this House of Commons. Mr. Speaker, the committee stage on the Treaty of Rome, not a matter of days, but 22 days. On Maastricht, 23 days. The truth is, whatever your view on the bill itself, conducting yourself in the way that this government does is totally and utterly unacceptable. But, Mr. Speaker, reading the bill, it's no wonder, one moment, I will give way in a moment, it is no wonder that the government and this Prime Minister is trying to ram through this bill in 3 days with such little scrutiny. Whatever the views across this House, the papers before us do not represent a secure future for our constituents. I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
Most grateful to for giving way. He says that we're not giving enough time for this discussion. Can you therefore explain why it was in this second reading debate, this very important second reading debate, the Labour Party ran out of speakers some hour ago?
Mr. Speaker, there were over 30 contributions from the backbenches, some excellent contributions from the benches behind me. And let me say this as well, Mr. Speaker. The withdrawal agreement and the bill, even if passed, do not end matters. Rather, they open up a whole new series of disputes. And what do we hear today? The party that championed employment tribunal fees now asks them to trust us on workers' rights. The Foreign Secretary on the weekend told us of smart regulations. Let me translate that. The Tory party, this Tory party, does not want to protect our rights, it wants to shred them. And let me go on and let me quote. The weight of employment regulation is now backbreaking. The Collective Redundancies Directive, the Atypical Workers Directive, the Working Time Directive, and 1,000 more. Who said that? The man sat opposite me, the Prime Minister himself. He wants us to take his word on employment laws, but he mocks them when he gets the chance. He will never care about the working people of this country. And if we are to believe what the Prime Minister said, and he promised virtually everything in the debate earlier today, if he was so concerned about protecting workers' rights, about safeguarding our environment, he would have left those provisions in the legally binding withdrawal agreement and not shifted them to the non-legally binding political declaration. Why should we believe a word he says now? And that's why, Mr. Speaker, the TUC, Unison, Unite, the GMB all recognise that his 11th hour comments today are worthless. I'll give way.
My honourable friend speaking very well. Doesn't he agree with me that there are no mention of environmental rights at all in this bill? And so we will have no surety at all around the environment. Shouldn't that be put back in?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and the truth is the damage this bill does to workers' rights is just the tip of the iceberg. It'll create a border in the Irish Sea and impose burdens on Northern Ireland, Great Britain trade, something the Prime Minister himself promised would never happen. And by the way, Clause 21 of the bill makes it explicit, and yet, extraordinarily, the Prime Minister continued to deny it when he opened the debate today. What did he talk about? Light touch measures to illegal trade, endangered animal species and ban firearms. And yet, that completely contradicts what the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union eventually said at the House of Lords Select Committee yesterday, that there will be exit summary declarations required for Northern Ireland and GB. There's no point the Prime Minister shaking his head. That's what the bill says. The Prime Minister should read the bill. In addition, Mr. Speaker, the bill will reduce Parliament to... I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
I thank him for giving way. I agree with the point he made earlier on that you can't trust this Prime Minister when it comes to workers' rights, and he mentioned the TUC. So is he disappointed then that so many Labour backbenches seem to be agreeing or seem to happy to take the Prime Minister's word, and they look like they're going to go through the lobbies and vote for this?
Mr. Speaker, I have respect for all honourable members who wish to try and change this bill in committee, but that only reinforces the point that a proper committee stage should be allowed for this bill. Because the bill, as it stands, reduces Parliament to the role of observer in the next phase of the negotiations. Read clause 31. It's 31.3 if the Justice Secretary wishes to read it. And it makes very clear that nothing would be accepted as inconsistent with the existing political declaration. It also includes, in Clause 30, as the Justice Secretary's got the bill in front of him, Clause 30 is the trapdoor to no deal at the end of transition. Anyone thinking this bill is a way to end no deal should read that clause and think again. Mr. Speaker, this is a flawed bill implementing a fundamentally bad deal. It would open the door to a low regulation, low wage economy. This deal can only lead to a bare bones free trade agreement or no deal at the end of next year. And now the Prime Minister puts his agreement in front of the House and asks everyone to look away while he pushes it through. If he's so confident of his deal, why is he so afraid of scrutiny of it? Mr. Speaker, for working people, the rights and protections in our laws have been hard won. Rather than put all this at risk by waving this bill through, they need to be secured for future generations. This country deserves more than this botched deal and this rushed legislation, and that's why we'll be voting against it in the lobbies tonight.
Mr. Robert Buckland, Secretary for Justice.
Mr. Speaker, there comes a time in politics when all of us have to look at ourselves in the mirror and ask the following question, me included. Are we up to the level of events? Are we truly going to serve the people who put us here? Now, I have the honour of speaking last in what I think we would all agree is the most pivotal of parliamentary debates. And I suppose for me there's a sort of symmetry in this because of the long association I have had in supporting our membership of the European Union. I was a proud Remainer, somebody who campaigned assiduously for membership and for whom the result of June 2016 was a bitter blow. And you know, I've just heard a word sotto voce across the chamber, traitor. Now that concerns me, Mr. Speaker. It concerns and should concern all of us, because I do not believe that anybody in this place is a traitor. I do not believe that anybody, whatever view they might have, is somehow disloyal or dishonourable or dishonest or below the standards that we would expect in this place, because I believe that not only do we call ourselves honourable members, we are honourable men and women. And we come here with the best of intentions. We come here in all sincerity to try and find a way through for the people who we represent, to make a decision, a hard, a fast, and a specific decision at that. It's not easy, but we're here to do difficult, Mr. Speaker. That is our job. We are sent here by each of our constituents to get on with it. And over the last few months, the voices that I hear in my constituency, as right across the country, come out loud and clear. Whether we will leave or will remain, for the love of God, get on with it, is what I am being told. And I want to, Mr. Speaker, just deal a moment with the speech from my honourable friend, the member for Winchester, who I thought put it extremely well. He, in many respects, has found himself in the sort of moral dilemma that a lot of us in this chamber have been placed in the last 3 years. He resigned from government because of his convictions, and I think that is an act that speaks volumes. But he put it well when he said that the best way in the circumstances, the only way to avoid what he would regard as the problem of a no-deal Brexit is to vote for both these motions this evening. And I say both these motions because the one will not work without the other. We're left, Mr. Speaker, with a fixed date, a date that was not chosen by us. It was never the subject of an application that we made to extend Article 50, but it was a date that was chosen by our friends in the European Union. That was the 31st of October. The 31st of October was not a mere caprice plucked out of the air. It was something real and meaningful for the 27. It was in their interests, it was administratively important for them, it was backed by proper reason, and therefore it is something that we should respect. For a moment, let us put ourselves in the shoes of our negotiating partners. They want certainty, they want to be able to move on, and they want to know that in their negotiating partner they have somebody who they can trust and rely upon. And I'll give way to the Honourable Gentleman.
So, just on that point then, so how do they feel our negotiating partners look on this Parliament that was prorogued at a time when we could have been spending time on this issue? We had more than 21 days to debate it in that circumstance.
Exactly. I think the Honourable Gentleman, who's been here a good few years, has lived like all of us through this process. And I think the hours, the days, the months, the years that we have debated this issue are ones that amply demonstrate that I think every one of the 650 members, or those who are able to take part, Mr. Speaker, have had their say. Take this withdrawal agreement. The elements that, of course, have been significant and different relate to the provisions on Northern Ireland and the future relationship. But I think we would be kidding ourselves if we do not admit that large elements of this agreement were elements that we have known about, we have debated, and we have aired and analysed over the last few months. More than the last few months, the better part of a year. And therefore, I think with respect, I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. Before he goes into the detail, will he agree with me that you don't have to love this deal? You don't have to love the programme motion. You might even think it's a very bad deal or a very bad programme motion. But for those of us who wish to avoid the worst, it is better than the worst.
Well, the Honourable Gentleman, my Honourable friend, in his nuanced way, makes an important point. That in the pursuit, Mr. Speaker, in the pursuit of perfection, we are in danger of losing the entire House. And none of us, the majority of us in this chamber, have made it clear that the one thing we do not want is a no-deal Brexit. Through all the debates and all the decisions that we've had, that one thing has been clear. And I'll give way to my right honourable friend.
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for giving way. One concern that many of us still have is that we may end up for Great Britain with a no-deal exit. Can my right honourable friend assure me that on the face of the bill, we will make sure that Parliament has an opportunity to vote before the 1st of July on whether the implementation period should be extended, whether for 1 or 2 years, if the negotiations do not look like we're going to get a free trade agreement by the end of the year, and that the government will abide by that vote?
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. I know this issue has been concerning members right across the House. What is to happen if there is to be potential with regard to an extension of the implementation period? We believe that we can negotiate in the time that we have now, but we accept that Parliament has a legitimate role to play, and I can bring forward an amendment to that effect that would allow Parliament to have its say on the merits of an extension of the implementation period, and the government will abide by that. Now, there is an example of representative democracy working well, Mr. Speaker, because one of the things that we British are prided for is our ability to compromise, to listen to each other, to learn from each other, to respect each other, and to come to a reasonable compromise. I've done everything that I can in my political career to reflect those values, and I believe and I see many other honourable and right honourable members who share that view, and I'll give way to the member for Bath.
I thank him for giving way. I have many times here made the argument for a compromise. I will vote for the government's deal, although I think it's rubbish, but I will vote for the deal if he will vote for a people's vote at the same time.
I have to commend the honourable lady for her persistence, but to reopen the issue in that way would be, with the greatest of respect to my friends who support it, the ultimate cop-out for this Parliament. It is time, Mr. Speaker, that all of us who believe in representative democracy accept the fact that the whole concept of parliamentary representation is itself on trial. It's on trial in a way that perhaps none of us had ever envisaged. But acknowledging the fact that we are facing unprecedented challenge is something that should all make us...
Order. The Secretary of State is entitled to conclude his speech without being yelled at. Mr. Robert Buckland.
It's something that should all make us focus even more determinedly upon the need to make decisions, however imperfect, however unpalatable, however untimely they might seem to honourable members. The public demands nothing less than for us to make a positive move. The time for decision making is now. The time for proposing nothing, opposing everything, and seeking to play old-fashioned politics is over. We have to get on with this. And as somebody who spent my life believing in the concept of our membership of the European Union, it comes as bitter gall to me personally. But it's not about me, and it's not about individuals, it's about all of us. And I'll give way very briefly to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you. The Justice Secretary has said it's time for decisions. Before making a decision, I would like the Justice Secretary to give the Unionist community of Northern Ireland a complete assurance that there is nothing in the Prime Minister's new Brexit deal which undermines the constitutional status of Northern Ireland and the consent principle of the Good Friday Agreement.
And on that note, Mr. Speaker, I'm able to give the Honourable Lady an unequivocal assurance that is positive. There is nothing to undermine that, nothing that we will do will undermine that, and she can be assured of that fact. And on that important point, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby. Order. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Stuart Andrew and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the noes, Nick Dakin and Nick Smith. Lock the doors!
The ayes to the right, 329. The noes to the left, 299.
The ayes to the right, 329. The noes to the left, 299. So the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Unlocked. Order. Programme motion to be moved formally.
I beg to move.
Move formally, thank you. The question is as on the order paper. As many as other opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby. Question is as on the order paper in respect of the programme motion. As many as other opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. Tellers for the ayes, Stuart Andrew and Ian Stewart. Tellers for the noes, Nick Dakin and Nick Smith. Lock the doors! Order.
The ayes to the right, 308. The noes to the left, 322.
The ayes to the right, 308. The noes to the left, 322. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlocked. Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, this House emphatically rejected the Prime Minister's deal. Tonight, the House has... Well, you're too hasty. I've not finished yet. Tonight, the House has refused to be bounced into debating a hugely significant piece of legislation in just 2 days, with barely any notice and an analysis of the economic impact of this bill. The Prime Minister is the author of his own misfortune. So I make this offer to him tonight. Work with us, all of us, to agree a reasonable timetable, and I suspect this House will vote to debate, scrutinise and, I hope, amend the detail of this bill. That would be the sensible way forward, and that's the offer I make on behalf of the opposition tonight.
Point of order, the Prime Minister. Point of order.
Let me say in response, Mr. Speaker, how welcome it is, even joyful, that for the first time in this long saga, this House has actually accepted its responsibilities together, come together and embraced a deal. I congratulate honourable members across the House on the scale of our collective achievement, because just a few weeks ago hardly anybody believed that we could reopen the withdrawal agreement, let alone abolish the backstop. That is indeed what they were saying. And certainly nobody thought that we could secure the approval of the House for a new deal. And we should not overlook the significance of this moment. And I pay particular tribute to those members of the House who were sceptical and who had difficulties and doubts and who decided to place the national interest ahead of any other consideration. But, Mr. Speaker, I must express my disappointment that the House has again voted for delay, rather than a timetable that would have guaranteed that the UK would be in a position to leave the EU on October the 31st with a deal. And we now face further uncertainty, and the EU must now make up their minds over how to answer Parliament's request for a delay. And the first consequence, Mr. Speaker, is that the government must take the only responsible course and accelerate our preparations for a no-deal outcome. But secondly, I will speak to EU member states about their intentions until they have reached a decision. Until they have reached a decision, I must say, we will pause this legislation. And let me be clear. Our policy remains that we should not delay, that we should leave the EU on October the 31st, and that is what I will say to the EU, and I will report back to the House. And one way or another, we will leave the EU with this deal to which this House has just given its assent. And I thank members across the House for that hard-won agreement.
Point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say I find the response of the Prime Minister quite extraordinary. Because the facts of the matter are...
Order. The right honourable gentleman is entitled to raise a point of order, and he is entitled to be heard. Let's hear the right honourable member, and then we will expedite progress. Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The facts of the matter are this is yet another humiliating defeat for the Prime Minister this evening, who has sought to railroad through this House legislation that requires proper scrutiny. And rightly, this House has spoken with a very clear voice to tell the Prime Minister he is not on. And furthermore, it is absolutely crystal clear what should now happen, because there is legislation passed by this House. It is the law of the land, on the basis of not agreeing a deal, that the Prime Minister is instructed, Prime Minister, to seek an extension. Go to Brussels and do as you have been instructed, and do not put yourself offside against this Parliament. Mr. Speaker, it is crystal clear that this is a government that has no confidence, but a government that has sought to ignore the wishes of the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish people. It is obvious to us that if we want to guarantee our rights as EU citizens, then Scotland has to become an independent country. And I wonder to that end if you can advise me as to what we must do in this House, both in terms of securing the extension, but also in terms of protecting Scotland's national interest as to what options are open to us.
To the right honourable gentleman, but I have a sense that his question is largely rhetorical. I say that in no disobliging spirit. I don't think the right honourable gentleman needs my advice, or even if he doesn't need it tonight. And so we'll leave it there for now, and we can't... would the right honourable lady forgive me if I take the point of order from the Father of the House? Oh, well, he's being equally obliging. Equally obliging. No, in that case, very well. Press on. Point of order, Mr. Kenneth Clark.
Your decision, Mr. Speaker. I don't think either of us particularly mind. Can I? It is a point of order, almost, Mr. Speaker.
Ask the Father of the House, is it your first, sir?
Can I ask the Prime Minister and everybody else to reconsider the suggestion he made that we pause the progress of the bill tomorrow? I congratulate him on winning approval for the deal he negotiated. I think, said in the House once, I would apologise to him and congratulate him if he actually got it, and he has achieved it. And the second reading vote was the approval of his deal. The argument is how long the House is allowed to take over considering it. I can't quite see the logic of pausing progress on the bill when the whole House is expecting the next 2 days to be spent on it. It would enable us to see how quickly the House is actually proceeding, what sort of time is being looked for, and it may enable then, if people start filibustering, which I hope they won't, for the government to get a majority for a timetable motion if it came back, which was a modest adjustment to the one he had, because I think 3 or 4 days more would certainly do it.
Grateful to the right honourable and learned gentleman, the Father of the House, for his point of order, and I await the development of events, but I think it is not unreasonable for me to say that as of now, unless there's been any change, my understanding, I say to the Father of the House and for the benefit of colleagues, is that the Leader of the House intends, I have a draft copy, to make a business statement which sets out government intentions for the coming days. I say that cautiously in case the government has changed its mind, but I don't think it has changed its mind. I wasn't expecting it to do so. So we will hear from the leader ere long. Meanwhile, point of order, Jo Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Twice in the last 3 days, the Prime Minister has failed to force his bad Brexit deal through this House without adequate scrutiny. Without adequate scrutiny. He continues in an irresponsible vein to talk up the prospect of no deal. Is it not time to end the brinksmanship and replace it with some statesmanship, to seriously and respectfully engage with our European friends to secure an extension to Article 50 to enable this House to pass legislation for a people's vote, or, if he prefers, to have proper scrutiny of his bill, or indeed it may well be for a general election. All of those things require a decent extension to Article 50. He should be a statesman and go and secure it.
I'm grateful to the honourable lady. Do I get the impression that Mr. Nigel Dodds wishes to raise a point of order. Of course, Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I say, first of all, on the second reading vote, of course, many honourable members, certainly in my hearing, voted for that second reading, although they were against the contents of the deal and said that they would want to see changes. And it is perfectly proper and right, and the House has made a very wise decision to allow further time for detailed examination of some of the most important legislation that we will ever have to consider, particularly given the impact on Northern Ireland. And at this stage, I would say to the Prime Minister, as he reflects on the votes on Saturday and he studies the votes tonight, that he would sit down with us and talk to us again about what can be done even at this late stage to ensure that we join in this great quest to get Brexit done, but as one United Kingdom.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for his point of order. Point of order, Mrs. Anne Main.
From the Chair that this second reading has been passed with a significant majority, because the leader of the Liberal Democrats and the leader of the SNP keep saying it has not been passed. Can the Chair clarify that the second reading was passed with a majority?
That is undeniably true. That is undeniably true. I'm not sure that my clarification was required, certainly not for members, but nevertheless, for the benefit of those observing our proceedings, the Honourable Lady's got a very fair point. It is important to be clear, the second reading of the bill was carried, as I announced, by 329 votes to 299. It was the programme motion that was defeated by 322 to 308. So that is by way of being a public service broadcast. Yes, very well, yes. Point of order, Lucy Powell. Yes, I will come to the Honourable Lady whom I saw afterwards, but point of order, Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I just wondered if you could clarify for us how getting Brexit done sits with pausing Brexit, because this feels like a very churlish reaction to what is a straightforward request, which is this House just have a short amount of time. Do those two things equate in your mind, Mr. Speaker?
Grateful to the Honourable Lady for her point of order. I think the fairest thing I can say to the Honourable Lady is this, and it's a factual point of which the leader and I'm sure the Prime Minister will be aware. As a result of the fact that the programme motion was turned out, and it's very encouraging that the former Government Chief Whip is nodding vigorously, we could not proceed, I must advise the House, we could not proceed with the start of committee consideration for which there is currently no authority. So, if I may say so, people are entitled to their own views about the attitude of one leader or another, but I certainly am not going to make any charge of churlishness at all. I think, to be fair, the Prime Minister is in pragmatic fashion accepting the immediate implications of the result. And it is literally a time to pause and consider how to proceed. I make no other point beyond that, but it's encouraging that I think Sir Patrick McLaughlin, point of order.
Mr. Speaker, can you confirm that what the Prime Minister has done tonight, he had actually no other alternative? Because under the last Labour government, they passed timetabling motions, which meant bills had to have a timetabling motion for them to carry on. Therefore, the action of members tonight to vote against the timetable motion means that we can't continue with the business as we used to be able to until the changes were made by the last Labour government.
That's right, well said, Patrick. I don't think the Right Honourable Gentleman requires my endorsement. Suffice it to say that a book could be written on the subject of the genesis of programme motions, and it may well be the Right Honourable Gentleman is tempted to pen it, though whether it would prove to be a bestseller is another matter. If the Right Honourable Gentleman will forgive me, I'll come first of all to the Honourable Lady whom I've kept waiting. Point of order, Liz Saville-Roberts.
Could he explain to me, and I'm sure to people outside, now that the government has chosen to pause legislation, and by doing that to extend the Brexit process,
Order. I accept that feelings are running high, but the honourable lady must be heard. Point of order, Liz Saville-Roberts.
The government will appreciate, and people outside, that there is now more opportunity to release the economic impact assessments, which we should all have sight of before we make such material decisions.
Before the honourable lady makes her own point in her own way, and it requires no comment from me, but I thank her for saying what she said. I will come to the right honourable lady. Point of order, the Father of the House.
I'm grateful for your indulgence, Mr. Speaker. Would it be in order for the House to adjourn for an hour so that the Leader of the House could come back with an amended timetable motion to put to the House for its approval?
No. Be inclined to accept that without notice. And what I would say to the right honourable and learned gentleman is that it would be potentially orderly, but I have, if he'll forgive me saying so, to read the runes. And I have no sense, notwithstanding the argument that he has advanced, that that is the wish of the government. The fact that the Prime Minister has just exited the chamber seems to me rather to reinforce that view. I make no criticism at all. I'm simply saying he's left the chamber. I don't think he has any appetite for the preference of the right honourable and learned gentleman, which I hope he can bear with stoically and with fortitude. And if the leader wanted to do that, he'd have said so, and he hasn't, so he doesn't. And point of order, Angela Eagle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But the leader of the opposition got up and made an offer to the party opposite to have a proper discussion about having a different programme motion, which would have given us more time for the release of things like impact assessments and more time to discuss what's a very complex and important bill. This, Mr. Speaker, has not been addressed, and whilst it's correct that we can't proceed tonight, it is the case, surely, if there was an agreement between the front benches, that we could re-establish a timetable and look and scrutinise this bill properly, if we didn't have a Prime Minister that was behaving like a 2-year-old and playing silly games.
I note what the right honourable lady has said. The position is as I have explained, and colleagues will understand that senior figures in this place anticipate different scenarios, and it's not uncommon for them to communicate those to the chair. Members on both sides of the House, and the leader did me the courtesy of informing me in advance of what the government's attitude would be in the event of a particular result, and he has not departed from that view. So I'm telling the House what the government's current intention is, about which colleagues will hear more in the business statement. That is very much a matter for the government, and I'm not trying to choke off what the right honourable lady wants. I'm simply telling her we are where we are as things stand. The orderly thing, colleagues, forgive me, the orderly thing to do at this point is simply to proceed with what would be the choreography. I think I have a sense of how it's going to proceed, but with, in the first instance, the money resolution to be moved formally.
Not moved.
Not moved. Thank you. Ways and Means resolution to be moved formally.
Not moved.
Thank you. Not moved. Colleagues, we come now to a series of motions, and I think number 9, 7, 8, and 19. Yes. And if I may suggest it, we will take number 6 first. Motion number 6, the whip to move, executing the European Union, brackets, gas, close brackets.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as have that have been say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 7, exiting the European Union, the whip to move.
I beg to move.
The question is as on the order paper. As many as have that have been say aye. Of the contrary, no. No. The division is deferred until tomorrow. Motion number 8, exiting the European Union, brackets, auditors, close brackets, the whip to move.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is as on the order papers, men's other opinions say aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Very well. The division is deferred until tomorrow. Motion number 9, exiting the European Union, brackets, sea fisheries, close brackets, whip to move.
I beg to move.
Sorry?
Agriculture.
I do beg your pardon. You're entirely correct. Agriculture. Yes, indeed. Number 9. He still begs to move, and that's helpful. The question is, as on the order papers, most of that have been say aye. No. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18. Up to 18. Yes. With the leave of the House, I propose to take motions 10 to 18 together. 10 to 18 together. Colleagues can see what they are if they look. The whip to move. The question is, as on the order paper, in respect of motions 10 to 18 inclusive. As many as have that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Motion number 19, exiting the European Union, brackets, financial services, close brackets, whip to move.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order paper, as many as have that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. The division is deferred until tomorrow. Motion number 20 on legal aid and advice. The whip to move.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, as many as have that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. I think we come out of the business of the House. Motion number 21 on business of the House. The whip to move.
I beg to move.
Thank you. The question is, as on the order papers, most other opinions say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes